To be honest, it was finding some of these files that got released that I was never ever expecting to be released. I never thought they would ever see the light of day because they were so sensitive and so explosive in some ways. And they came out around 2019, 2020. And I just followed them, and I just had to write them up. I had to write the book, and it was in some ways the book which was the most fun to write, in some ways the easiest to write because the material was there and so rich and so personal and so full of operational details. I was initially only going to write a short article on it, but there was so much going on. There was so much fun that I couldn't stop. And then 100,000 words later, here we are. I think I started writing it in around 2019, maybe 2020. I have early, hazy, repressed memories of lockdown, and I managed to get the first tranche of these files before COVID, I think. So I vaguely remember working at home, going through them. So that must have been about 6 years, because there were just so many. I think in the end we looked through about 8,000 files in some form or another. So that took quite a long time to go through them all. Um, and it was quite tricky to write in some ways because Britain was meddling and doing these propaganda operations in all different parts of the world. And in order to make sense of what was going on in terms of a British propaganda operation to try to undermine, I don't know, African nationalists in Kenya, you need to have a decent working knowledge of what was going on in Kenya that they were trying to exploit in the kind of local conditions. And the same goes for when they were trying to mess around in Indonesia or Yemen. So it also took quite a lot of wider reading about the Cold War, about nationalism, about different civil wars in parts of the global South, in order just to make sense of what was an incredibly rich archival trail in the UK. As I was writing it, there were some quite fun moments, partly just uncovering new characters that I had never heard of before, and I'm really looking forward to sharing some of that with the readers. I've never written such a book, a character-driven book before, which again is a consequence of the richness of the archival material. And I'm a historian of British secrecy. I understand what gets kept back, and often for good reason. Even I was shocked. You're sitting there, you're in the archive, and you're reading the names of journalists who were on the take from British propagandists, the newspapers who were the most useful conduits of planted British material, and you'll see the odd little snippet where they're in an unguarded moment they're slagging off journalists for being lazy and and for receiving planted stories because they couldn't be bothered to write their own. You can see these kind of dismissive comments that the IRD, the British propagandists, were making, which was great fun. But another nice moment I remember was as I was writing it, I was also in the privileged position of going to different practitioner type events where offering historical insight into the world of counter disinformation today. And I remember there was one occasion I went to an event in Latvia, and everyone was there. These practitioners were talking about how to counter disinformation, the challenges of this, some of the dangers in exposing or talking up the threat of disinformation too much. And I remember sitting there in the audience the day before I was going to talk and thinking, this is almost word for word from the 1960s. It was almost verbatim, the same challenges, the same dilemmas, even using the word disinformation. And so the next day, as the smug historian that I was, I got up on stage and I literally whipped out a file that I use in the book from 1964, and I read it. And it was almost an exact summary of what the high level practitioners had been saying the day before about countering Russia today. And I'll never forget that, because it showed the relevance of this and how even in an age of AI and computer generated disinformation and the genuine kind of new challenge that brings, all these principles are often quite there's lots of continuity in this, and I have enjoyed through the writing process reminding today's practitioners of a bit of that, playing the role of the tweed wearing historian, reminding them there's nothing new in the world. The front cover of the book is really kind because it carries an endorsement on it which says Le Carre meets Monty Python. So I think there's two inspirations right there. And I mean, obviously, I would never ever come close to imitating Le Carre, but I did try to channel some of that intrigue and try to channel some of that moral ambiguity that you see in some of the Smiley stories, and trying to bring a almost a novelistic approach to writing. So for the first time ever, there's dialogue in my book, which I would never have as a historian. That felt quite alien to me, and I was trying to channel some of the dialogue, some of the moral ambiguity. But on a more realistic level, if we're honest, I was also inspired by a book I read a couple of years back called The Book Forger by a guy called Joseph Hone. And he's an academic like me. And it's a book about a Victorian book forger, based on archival material, based on a true story. But he kind of pushes the boundaries and was trying to tell this book in a novelistic manner. And I was quite inspired by that. And I thought, yeah, can I push this a little bit? Can I go further? And my advice to other academics who are authors is, you know, times are tough. Universities are under lots of pressure, as we all know. And so trying one to recognize that this is just such a fantastic opportunity to be able to write some of this stuff, and I try and use it almost as a an escape from some of the reality of day-to-day university life, even though it's a core part of my job. Being able to come away and enter this world of spy history. And then the second thing I say to colleagues is try and carve out writing time, because otherwise we have so many competing pressures and it gets pushed backwards and backwards and backwards, particularly if we don't have a really strict deadline. There's always marking, there's always teaching, there's always the day job. So trying to get into a mindset where you're not waiting for summer to do any writing, because as academic historians listening will know, summer doesn't exist anymore in the world of resits and everything else. And so being able to try get into the habit of writing 500 words a day, or getting into the habit of being able to, if you've got a free hour in between meetings and marking, just quickly dive in and do some editing or do a bit of writing, even if it's rubbish, just getting it down on paper. I mean, that stuff I write, it's absolute drivel, but I've got half an hour and I'll just bang some words out and edit it later. I think people say to me, "Oh, have you managed to keep the writing going or write so that many books?" That's why. If I've got half an hour, I write, and that's the biggest advice I can give to people is try to enjoy it, try and see it as a fun thing, and just crack on. It's not this big scary thing that has to wait until some undefined point in the future.